Hello guys! Welcome back to Not Just Mecha. It's Marco here, and today we paint Abaddon the Despoiler with acrylics and a bunch of cool brush techniques. The last video left me with a pleasant need to test some exciting ideas, and the renewed artistic interest for Space Marines, and the large, simple canvas full of potential they represent. So be ready to see again more chunky power armors on the channel. Don't forget to drop a like to help the diffusion of this video and the channel, and of course subscribe to join my painting journey in every corner of the hobby. And if you want to support my work, check my Patreon page, where you can find articles, extra material, and the real-time footage of my videos, with every single little line and brushstroke. Thanks a million, guys! Oh, and let me know in the comments which legion or chapter you want to see next. I like my Chaos Marines to be dark, rough, and gritty, and in general a bit more grounded and realistic than their Loyalist counterpart, with their brighter, more positive colors and heraldries. I use the contained muted palette and dark values to remain faithful to the dark nature of the character, and to make the main focal points of the sculpt pop out from this frame, I've introduced sudden jumps of luminosity and saturation. The OSL effects and the bouncing lights are for sure eye-catching, and a great directional and narrative device, but the real protagonists of this paint job are textures and brushstrokes, and their different densities around the figure, that I used in a ton of different ways to add extra depth, sell the tactile feel of the materials, and the roughness of an equipment used in countless battlefields for millennia. And as you'll see later, even the ideas of living light, movement, and kinetic energy. With the idea of creating a grounded, mostly desaturated general palette in mind, I start the work using a neutral grey to fix a simple sketch of the main volumes. Setting a controlled, soft luminosity from the beginning, I make sure that all the transparent tones I'll apply on top later will be naturally toned down into more delicate and darker versions of themselves, without the need of extra work or additional mixes, even using the most powerful and saturated inks or GW contrast. I often use grey to create a more gentle transition into pure white, especially working on the larger volumes of monsters and vehicles, but in this case the use of grey is mostly based on the chromatic needs of the work. The flow of the theatrical frontal light is all here, with both its narrative and volumetric functions already working in the simple grayscale. But I can use a bit of pure white to bring the sketch even closer to the image of the final result I have in mind. This helps me in visualizing better the impact of the glow effects and their bubble of influence, giving me extra data to plan the next steps with colors in the most efficient way, and integrating the hint of these jumps of luminosity into the use of the midtones. If you want to create a super powerful, overwhelming glow, it's better to move this step to a more advanced stage and work it on top of the local colors to maximize the value and chromatic difference. But again, here I'm aiming to a softer, more realistic flow and integration of tones, so the sooner I have this information in place, the better. From here, the work is in the hands of the brush. I like to paint starting from the mid-values and the average hues of the midtones, to have a clear representation of the scheme, its elements and proportions, clearly in place before committing to proper lights, shadows and details. And the combo of black and white sketch and transparent paints like inks, contrast or even classic washes is able to set all this stuff in just a couple of simple steps. The natural light yellowish brown of agarose dunes is always a great base for non-metallic metal, gold and bronze. The most important thing to keep in mind working with transparent colors and applications is that luminosity and vibrancy completely come from the white underneath. And every single new layer is a physical barrier between your eyes and that internal source of light. So the tones you want to render as light or bright should be the first to apply. Better if in their purest and most saturated forms, to compensate for the bit of desaturation coming from the optical mix with white and the grayscale. And where I need to keep more of the original light as a boost for the glow effect, I simply thin down the paint to make it more transparent, favoring the intensity of the values over the local tones. Working on a glass or paper palette really helps in maintaining a fine control over this kind of extreme dilutions. From the very beginning of the work with colors, the quality of the brushstrokes is where I put most of my attention. Here I want to render the visual idea of the inner side of hide or untanned leather. So my first move is to break the total smoothness of the sculpt with a bunch of irregular touches, creating with a ton of translucent smudges, random different opacities, and actual water stains, a rich, moving, natural pattern. The general order of operations is kind of the opposite of the one you use in a classic layering process. I hit first the most raised and external details, framing their shapes and fixing the imperfections around their borders with the deeper elements. Instead of needing more attention and precision, this process is progressively more and more efficient, simple and loose after every new step. Because fluid paints tend to fill the space by capillarity, creating perfect borders and sharp panel lines that don't need washes or extra work to create a respectable dark definition. If you planned well your steps, deep lines and joints will be the only areas where multiple, highly concentrated and overlapped colors meet, creating automatic natural dark values, opacity and depth, taking completely away the need to rework these details. Following this flow, the black armor becomes the most logic last stage of the foundational work. From raised to deep, from light to dark, and in every stage of the work, from general to particular. That's the secret mantra for an easy, relaxed flow with underpainting and contrast. And most of the time for painting in general. For the sake of speed and absolute smoothness, and because I don't like the vibrancy and saturation of neither blue nor orange from the contrast line, I have to briefly betray my commitment to the brush. But honestly, it's just for a quick, blurred filter of orange around the face. Spraying with a high pressure into these shapes, I make sure the paint reaches every deep corner. Here, I prefer for sure to trade a bit of extra work on the skin of Abaddon's face for a more solid and chromatically powerful glow from within. And phthalo blue on the sword and the power claw. Phthalo blue is always a great option for unearthly magical glows, and you'll see soon the recurring theme of contrasting orange and blue appearing everywhere and in multiple forms. With these light, more saturated tones in place, I can start thinking about the black elements. And I start with a really cool idea on the cape. When I have to paint black, I never use proper pure black from the tubes. Black can take for sure multiple forms, and if you explore the artist lines of acrylics and oils, you can find a ton of interesting subtle shades that go from the warmer brownish tones of ivory black to the green hues of perylene black and the proper cold notes of lamp or blue black. But in my opinion, nothing beats the richness and the control you get from a mixed chromatic black. A 1-to-1 mix of bright saturated blue and orange is one of my favorite recipes for a deep black, easy to adapt and move between the extremely warm and cold sensations of the two original components. But in this specific case, I want to create the basic color of an old, heavily weathered piece of black leather. So instead of using pure orange, I use an orangey brown and all the grounding desaturation it brings into the mix. This is the kind of black you can find on the palette of still life and portrait painters, made precisely to sell a more natural representation of tones and values close to the more complex blacks we perceive in the real world. But we already explored a bit of the magic of chromatic black. And again, here the point is in the brushstrokes. And the big idea is to use heavy body paint for the real job it's made for, creating mass. I use a big size 6 brush and a ton of thick, undiluted heavy body paint to literally sculpt a physical texture for the cape. That is not only the fine structure of the stretched leather, but it also represents the movement of the cape floating around. Basically, with these curves, brushstrokes and physical lines, I want to paint something like the speed lines of a comic book, or the blurred rendering of a still frame of a moving object. And since I'm here with a bunch of thick, wet paint on the model, why not wet blend the rough rendering of the bluish light bouncing from the glove, and the purer orange glow cast by the flame? The whole process is super simple, fast, and deeply satisfying. I can build up all the paint I want because I want the texture, and the smoothness of the flow of tones becomes just a minor concern. Because even without water, with this amount of dense, wet paint involved, well, it's extremely easy to achieve. It's finally time to set the color of the armor. But at this point, you clearly know what my plan is, and all the technical reasons behind it. Again, orange and blue, clashing and working together to create something new, but still in complete harmony with all the other pieces of this chromatic puzzle, because the two ingredients of the recipe are always the same, with just different internal proportions. Here, I use two highly saturated tones. I'm balancing the mix towards the blue notes to create a deep bluish black, extremely different from the one used on the cape. And to take even more visual distance from the cape, I added to the mix a couple of drops of an extremely fluid silver. 2 drops inside this kind of big pool are not enough to alter the tone or the opacity, and the metallic pigments quickly separate in all this fluid, low-tension solvent. When the paint is dry, they look like micro-scratches and tiny, shiny imperfections of the armor that look like little dents, also adding a bit of real, physical grit to the surface. the mix is still incredibly transparent. So I can use multiple coats, or like here, localized glazed applications to reinforce shadows, contrast and definition. At this stage, I usually tend to have in place a lighter general set of values. But again, the idea here is to push on darkness, and the sudden contrast with the bright light effects. So a darker base gives me more initial contrast and control, and I have more virtual space to add textures and movement, while building my way up to the lights. To remain faithful to the idea of a grounded and realistic set of tones, my palette is based on a solid block of classic earth tones, plus a bit of bright orange to be able to intervene and overlap on the glow of head and flames, and in a later stage, bright green-blue and purple pastel tones, mostly to add variety to the temperature of the extreme lights of armor and cape. There are a ton of cool details to paint and to look at on this sculpt. So, to focus and keep the attention of the viewer on the focal points, you have to carefully balance how these elements are rendered. Stuff like the powerful orange glow, isolated and framed by the dark armor, and in the middle of two complementary bright blue elements. It's a great directional device. But when you guided the attention to a point, then you have also to retain it. My answer to this problem is to hyper-render the face with a ton of details, and a complex, realistic, high-contrast behavior of the orange light hitting the angular shapes of Abaddon's face. This sharp, precise, highly detailed rendering becomes a focal point inside the focal area, creating an exponential amount of focus. It also creates the cool optical illusion of actual optical focus. Your eyes see in high definition, only in the center of the field of vision, losing a ton of information all around. So, offering to the viewer this extra level of contrast between a little element crazily packed with content and visual information, surrounded by simpler shapes and shades, really improves the realism of the composition and the eye-catching nature of that element. With slightly different proportions, I use the same limited palette for the skulls. The big difference is again in the application and the brushstrokes, that move away from the tight smoothness and the gentle progressions used on the face, and become an aggressive stippling to render the gritty roughness of the old trophies. And introducing the cold note of a light blue-green, I use again the same palette for all the non-metallic metal gold of the trims. I want to make these elements cool and interesting for the eyes wandering between the main bits of the model, but I want the focus to remain in the top part of the figure. The materials of these areas get a high level of rendering and details because I'm aiming to a general high quality, but still, they don't get to the information density of the whole region around face and upper torso. Adding that pinch of blue inside the mix also helps making the trims a bit more complementary to the orange glow, becoming another part of its frame, with a sword and claw. I have to make a proper video about this, but as you can see from my palette, non-metallic metal can be easily painted with any color. This specific selection of brown tones is a classic jack-of-all-trades pool of traditional light browns, chosen mostly for the needs of the skin, for which I used it straight from the tubes, but simply adding a pinch of white here and there, I can easily bring it into the gold spectrum. Again, application, contrast and brushstrokes are what makes the whole difference. Oh, and only slightly out of topic. I've used the same tones for the bits of Dark Angel's armor, simply mixing the light blue with the yellow oxide, and increasing the value for the details with the desaturating contribute of white. The inner cape is probably the funniest part of the whole work. A lot of painters hate big, flat, empty areas. I live for them. This is a secondary element, pretty far away from the central shot, so a perfect candidate for a lower resolution treatment. That, I want to clarify, doesn't mean that I invest less time or attention on the part, or I use less brushstrokes. Excluding the back of the cape, this is probably where I have the thickest layer of paint and passes. It means that I make it purposely more blurred, layered, difficult to define in terms of macro shapes, and free from sharp, defined, contained borders. And this idea is even more important here, because considering the sculpt, we can assume that this cape is moving and snapping like a whip in the imaginary wind. So I want also to catch that kind of energy, and make it a point of contrast with the plastic, static power pose of Abaddon. Again, I keep the black armor for a late stage, where I have a better perception of the other elements all around. Nothing is in its definitive form, but now I can see what is the range of values and tones I'm working with, so I can start building some light using a fine, super controlled, and localized stippling of green-blue-gray. The rendering of black and its sense of darkness, it's both about its internal contrast and the relation with the values it has all around. And it's precisely this relativistic behavior that makes the topic so difficult to explain. As a rule of thumb, treat it like a satin, slightly glossy, non-metallic metal, working with small, localized shapes of light, leaving a lot of breathing space to the dark midtones and the shadows. Reflections and light will inevitably move into the grey spectrum, so the dark areas are what remains carrying the original black local color. Again, that's why an interesting chromatic black in the background. It's so important to add engaging information, where it's so difficult to add new one. The back of the cape is my release valve. where I go to unleash the brush after all the tight applications in the front. The work here is all about textures, energy, movement, and bouncing light. The path is literally paved and textured by the previous stages, so I just need to follow the flow, increasing the intensity and sharpening the reflections of the lights, and making the shadows darker, deeper, and more contrasting. All these just using cross-hatching, nervous lines, and aggressive brushstrokes. Working from a sketch to more and more precise, progressive levels of details and definition is always a beautiful, relaxing process. It's painterly and Cartesian at the same time, because you divide each of the challenges into smaller parts easy to manage and simple to bring to their best, tiny, localized result. But the real beauty is that all this stuff builds over itself, piles up, and there is that magical moment when all the elements converge into the final look, and you can finally say, it's done. Or maybe not. Just a little touch here. This needs a brushstroke. This can be a tiny bit brighter. Yeah, maybe an extra scratch or two here. This is fun. I can add something cool here. Just a tiny reflection. I can continue a bit more. I'm not tired. And here is the final result. I have a strong relation of love and hate with Space Marines as models, from any side or faction. As the white page, or any simple blank canvas, they can be the best thing in the world when I'm inspired, and I have a proper vision for the model. But without that fire, or plan in mind, they can easily become a terrifying emptiness impossible to fill. Luckily, I'm in the mood for big power armors. Probably because of the Horus Heresy energy filling the wargaming sphere. And with a great timing, I'm in a deep dive into the topic of rendering textures, the visual nature of surfaces, and the consistency of materials. So large sci-fi armors are perfect to test new ideas and approaches. So let me know what legion or chapter you want to see next. If you like this video, give it a like and subscribe. Remember that you can ask me anything down below with a comment, and you can follow my projects during the week using one of my socials. And if you want to support my work, check my Patreon page and join the community, or maybe ask for a commission. See you next week, guys!